There we go. That's great. Okay, so Marg, it's so lovely to have you here today. Thank you so much. We were just talking about the weather, weren't we? How how it's significantly warmer where you are, even for the part of Australia where you're based. So I really appreciate you taking the time out to visit us. I think it's quite late at night there, so thank you so much. So I thought we would start the conversation by, just talking about what sparked your interest in working with the early years, particularly with very young children, and your interest in early years education, and particularly around armed forces families. And then, yeah, so we'll start with that, and then I can ask you the second part of my question.
Yeah, great. So I was originally a creative arts educator. So I worked from a very young children right up to adults. And then after I had my own children, I just became fascinated in the way they learn and how foundational that is, how important it is to really be able to lay such a really good foundation, or the best that we can, and have really secure attachments during that time, and how important that is moving forward. So I then ended up doing my master's and then my PhD in early years areas. But for my PhD, I ended up looking at children from military families, and looking at how they coped, and how they came to understand about their parent who deployed. So it was a really specific thing, which a PhD needs to be. So it was looking at military families and other factors, but it was really specifically looking at the impact of when they deployed. Okay. So the reason that I ended up going down that track was I had a friend, and I was working with her at the time, and her son had trod on a mine in Afghanistan, and he unfortunately had passed away. He was an officer, but she had remained very good friends, very close friends with his friends, and they had children, and the children were not coping when their parent was away on deployment. So she reached out to me because I was an early childhood lecturer and said, look, could you just help me write these little photo books for these children, just to help them, just like one family. It wasn't like what it is now. It was just for one family. It was really personalized book. So they sent through what the children were struggling with, the makeup of the children, of the family, some photos, and, what do you want in it? And then I just sort of put together this PowerPoint book, like looking at those. And then I started interviewing people, another family who I had access to, and then it ended up being 4 storybooks to sort of cover different scenarios, all about parents deploying and helping children to cope. So these were just very rough, but like nice little personalized stories for these families. And at the time, I was putting in a proposal, and I had been accepted to do my PhD, and I was going to do that in dance because I'm creative arts. But in the process of talking to these families, and finding out about what was happening, it suddenly just started being a super familiar story to me, like from my childhood, because I had cousins who'd grown up with their parents deploying and parents in the military. And I had cousins who had their own children now, and they're in the military. And it was just oh, this is a thing, right? This is really interesting. This is so familiar to me. And it seemed like, well, nothing's changed. So I quickly just started doing some searches and looked, who had talked to these children, these very young children, about what they experienced, what they understood, how they were coping, if they were coping, what were they doing, what was the family doing to help the child cope. And I thought there'd be loads of studies out there. And when I got in there, it was like, oh, like there's nothing.
Yeah.
There were studies, but it was with older, like teenagers, and no one had really looked at the young children. And nobody had really talked to the educators, like the early childhood educators. And I thought, well, that's what I want to do. So the dance PhD got thrown out the window. I hadn't sort of really started. And then I went down this other track. I had to find different supervisors, and then I got stuck into that. But yeah, so I am not from a military family in my close personal family, but my grandfather served, my two uncles served in Vietnam. And one of my uncles was a conscript, but the other uncle was already a career soldier. And then he went to Vietnam twice and then died under very miserable circumstances, with what we would now probably call PTSD and moral injury and all the rest of it, at the age of 42. So leading up to that death, it was pretty horrendous time for my cousins. I didn't really understand that. I used to say, like, ask questions, and one side of the family would say, oh, well, if he just gave up drinking and smoking, everything would be all right, because there was just really no understanding. And then my dad kept saying, no, he wasn't like this before the war. This is the war. This is the war. Nobody's talking about this. This is the war. And it really stayed with me because I was so close to that family and we had a lot of time with them growing up, but I just never really understood what they were going through. So yeah, it was a really interesting insight. I'm an outsider then in some ways, but like a nice picture in. And what's nice about our team is we have insiders. We have people who live in these families. So we have that nice balance, which I think really works, because sometimes I will question things, a team member will say, oh, well, that has to happen, or, that this is just what the families have to do. And I said, well, why do they have to do that? Like, so we have these conversations, which I think can really strengthen the work that we do. I think if everybody's in, and there's no outsider, there's not those people asking the hard questions about, why are you expected to do that? Like, where does that come from? Are you being paid to do that? Where's that pressure from? So it's sort of a nice balance.
Fabulous. And no, it's really important just to have diversity, isn't it? And different viewpoints. And it was really interesting you raising the point about that experience with your cousins. And I know you've just recently published your fantastic book on PTSD, so I'm sure you'll be talking about that later as well, which is wonderful. One of the things that really struck me about your resources, and I know we are going to look at them later on in the webinar, is the strengths-based approach that you adopt, which is wonderful. So why do you feel that strengths-based approach is so crucial for professionals and practitioners to adopt with children and young people from armed forces families?
Yeah, look, I think it's crucial for work with any children, but I can't imagine families where it's more important. And the reason is we know that children from armed forces families will have challenges. We just know that. And it's so easy just to jump straight in there, right? Just to go, oh, and they've got to deal with deployment, and they've got to deal with relocation and blah, 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 blah. But unless we really look at, really uncover those strengths, the protective factors that are there, the benefits, the opportunities, we're sort of shortchanging ourselves with the tools to be able to actually support them. So we need to know what it is we can support them with and how we can use their strengths as a family and as individuals to be able to deal with these stresses. We know that the stresses will be there, but we also have to realize that we've got to have some tools in our toolkit to be able to support them. Yeah.
Wonderful, yeah. And I know we'll be looking at that later on when you do share the wonderful resources as well. Just to go back, I know you were talking about being with your cousins, and you weren't aware, or you were aware obviously of what was going on, but looking at it from an outsider. When a parent was away, as you said, you spoke about challenges. It can be a very challenging time for very young children, and we said at the start, they can't always vocalize this. So how do very young children experience a parent working away, whether from deployment training or duty, and why is it so important to centre their lived experiences and use attachment informed approaches to support them? So why is this so crucial at this stage?
Mm. Yeah, great question. I think with children and babies, if there's a real temptation to say, oh, well, like they don't know, you know. And the reason that
They're
parents
just
and
young.
sometimes, yeah, and sometimes educators and sometimes support workers, they'll say, oh, well, you know, they wouldn't understand. And the reason they think they don't understand that a parent has disappeared is because they can't write an essay about it, or they can't, you know, maybe they can't tell you in a paragraph, or you know, they maybe can't put it in a sentence, right? But even a baby, if they've had another parent there and the parent has been a source of comfort and support, they know that that parent's not there the next night. You know, they know that. And they also know that, you know, the parent that's left at home and the household has maybe gone up a notch in in the temperature of the house, right? The stress, you know, they know if they're being comforted by someone who's in tears or who's not coping or who's really stressed or who's holding them in a way that, you know, shows that stress, or talking to other people in the house showing that stress. Babies are sponges, you know, we accept that for their learning, but we need to also accept it for what they know is going on, right? They just know. We know that dogs know when we're packing up to go on holidays, right? So how is it that a human baby would not know that there's something going on? You know, like we just really need to be realistic about that. And I'm not saying that to make, you know, parents feel guilty or anything else, but what we need to do is to make sure that children know that they will be comforted. Children know there is a routine, whether that other parent has gone or not. And it doesn't mean that the routine will be, you know, like ridiculous, but just that there will be comfort. And it could be that there's more people involved in comfort. You know, it could be that, you know, someone else comes into the family to help out for a while, or it could be, you know, extended family and friends, or it could be that, you know, an older sibling steps up and provides some comfort to a young child, but that they will be comforted and their needs will be met, and that there will be bonding that will be happening, but it may just not be with that person there. Um, and just make sure that, you know, if there's a possibility for video calls or phone calls, that, you know, we remember to put the baby on the line to listen to the parent's voice, even though they might not understand everything that's happening in the conversation, but they're used to hearing background conversations anyway in the household. So it's important that they can hear the other parent's voice and see pictures of them and hear their voice in recordings, or, you know, make videos of the parent reading them a bedtime story, or make a little recording on their phone of the parent saying good night or something like that, that can be accessed at any time. And that could be a great comfort. It could be that the person who's going away could sing a little lullaby, you know, on a phone recording, and then that can be brought up at certain times of the night, and that can keep that parent fresh in the child's mind, even if they're not there for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, no, wonderful strategy. I actually remember my friend when she had her twins, before her husband deployed, he would record himself reading all the bedtime stories, which she actually
Mhm.
loved because she could
Yeah,
actually sit down and press the recording. So yeah,
yeah,
just keeping that familiarity in
yeah.
the baby's environment is so important, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. And look, sometimes a parent, that they might know that they are not going to be able to communicate for, you know, security reasons or whatever it is, you know, travel for a few days. So just
Survivors,
having
yeah.
a few of those recordings up your sleeve can
And
really be a source of comfort when that child's, just having a bit of a meltdown. And, it's like, oh, well, let's listen to, mum or dad or whoever it is, because that can be gold for that parent who's trying to calm down a whole family or just the baby or just the toddler or whoever it is. Yeah.
it's such a simple thing, isn't it? Just obviously depending on the situation, but to make that recording prior to a deployment, it is just as
Mm,
simple as
absolutely.
doing. So yeah, so you're fantastic. Lots of really great advice there. Just to move on, I suppose, building on that, thinking about transitions and mobility. How that can be slightly different. So obviously mobility is a defining feature of Armed Forces life.
Mm,
And what kind of strengths, because strengths are at the forefront of your strengths-based approach. So what strengths, but also challenges do children experience during frequent moves? And I know
mm,
obviously when I was speaking to you last, you talked about the training cycle. There's quite a lot of movement with the serving parent as well. So, how do they experience frequent moves and increased transitions? And again, how can we as professionals support this with the
mm,
family
mm.
unit and in practice?
Mm-mm. Yeah, some great questions. So, like every country is different. In Australia, we usually have our armed forces families generally moving every 2 years at least, sometimes 18 months. And so it's really tough, right? But even if they only do, less than that, it's still significant, especially for a young child, that known place, that house is a known place, that early childhood educator is a known source of attachment and support, that, neighbor next door, or, these people are important to them. Um, you know, the place where we go to the park, these are touch points for the child's life. So can be really challenging. I mean, obviously it's challenging for the whole family because the stress levels of the family go up, but it's stressful for um, children because what they've known has sort of, just been sort of turned on its head a little bit. The good things is that the children often learn to seek comfort from each other and from the parent. They often sort of close ranks a little bit and find sources of support. So when you've got a really healthy set of relationships in the family, that can be a really great thing. It would be a whole other talk if we talked about the fact that if that isn't happening, I mean, that can be really difficult. We can prepare children for that move. Um, we've got whole modules about activities that early childhood educators can do in advance. I'll just give you a couple of examples, but please explore the
They're
modules. They're all
wonderful.
free. They're all free. So, you can do things like downloading pictures of the new early childhood service, downloading pictures of the house, of points of interest in the town, the new whatever they're going to, right? So you can do that. You can start talking about what's going to be fun about this new place. We have got little PowerPoint template books that talk about my old and new preschool or my old and new um, school or whatever it is that they're doing, my old and new house, and you can make little photo books with them. And the parents might be able to help with that by providing information or photos or whatever it is. And you can prepare for that. So it's not such a huge unknown. I mean, we all feel more comfortable when we know, in advance. Like we like agendas, right? I don't want to be
Yes.
called into my boss's meeting if I have no idea what she's going to talk to me about. But if I know it's about this topic, I can sort of, oh, okay, so I haven't done something wrong, or she's not going to tell me that, I'm being made redundant or something like that. So we all sort of, human nature is we go to the worst case scenario. So if we can just prepare the children, that can be really helpful. Um, we can get information from the family, like when they move there, will both parents be there if there are two parents, or will one of the parents already have deployed or something, some scenario? Will they be living in a motel first or temporary accommodation and then they move into a flat or a house or whatever? Like, what's it going to look like, that transition? Will they be driving there? Will they be flying there? Will they be, like, how will that happen? And then you can sort of create little scenes and little, with figurines and dolls and toys, and act out, what's going to happen, blocks, all that sort of stuff. So there's lots of different ways that you can prepare a child, but having them prepared is really good. If they see that their parents cope really well, as well as they can, moving with a whole family, then that can be a real model of resilience, right? Of coping strategies. And that often comes through with those children because, unlike some other people, they might be more likely to say, oh, well, there's a job opportunity coming up in Australia and I could do that. I know I could cope because I've coped with moving somewhere before and I didn't die,
Yeah.
like I coped, right? And I've seen how my mum did it and my dad did it, or whoever it is that helped them with that move. So, it can be a good thing. I'm not saying everybody should move all the time. And I do wish for less moves for our families because I think it is a strain.
Yeah, no, really great points. And just what you were saying about the routine and knowing just these simple things of just, just having that dialogue or the play with the younger child, just to make sure that they are aware that it's coming. And again, what you're
Mhm.
saying about relationships, that's crucial, isn't it? And
Mhm.
it can be
Mhm.
hard. I mean, sometimes parents can obviously show that resilience when they are moving, but also there can be stress as well. So it's just
Mhm.
trying to keep it
Mhm.
as consistent as possible, isn't it, for the young person
Yeah.
involved?
Look, absolutely. We've also got a storybook about relocations that we did last year. And in that book, it hones in on this extra special relationship the child has with a grandparent, and that
Wonderful.
how that can be a constant in their life, even though everything changes. Their early
Yeah.
childhood educator, their school teacher, their blah blah blah, but granddad's still there.
Yeah.
He's
It's the
he's a
constant.
constant, and he's an encourager, and he's a so it's a beacon. Really that's the same, right? And I think you also have to make the child realize that the family will remain the same, right? And that's really important. So that that there will be things that remain the same. I will still have the same family,
Yeah.
but we are moving to a new location. So someone's just asked in the chat about
Yeah.
where we can find the books. You'll be getting a handout soon. So yeah, and all the QR codes, they're all
All,
free.
all
Everything
free.
else is there. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, do not panic. You will go through all of the wonderful resources at the end, and Mark has very kindly got a wonderful handout for all of you to take away so that you can use them in your own practice. So we're very grateful for that as well. So yeah, so we've had a wee look at that. So I think that actually leads us on really nicely, Marg, to you sharing all your fantastic
Yeah,
resources and
right.
letting us see there's just such a wealth of fantastic resources to access from the program. So I'll hand it over to you so you can share. And do you want me to pop in that handout just now, or I can do it later?
That'd be good in a minute, but we'll just wait
Yeah,
for a
that's fine.
sec.
No
I'll go
problem.
through a few things.
Yeah,
Um, is that loading? Are you seeing that yet, or where are we up to?
fine.
Anything come through?
Not at the moment. It might just
Okay,
be.
I'll have another go. It might be my internet being a bit funny.
It's fine. It's the joys of
Oh,
technology. Oh,
here
there
we
we
go.
go.
That's good. That's good. Now I've just got to find All right. Now, can you see that in presenter view or is it in another sort of view?
Just your slides, Mark. Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Oh no, I've got the slides up, but I'm just trying
Oh,
to do so how I can sort of see. Okay. So you can see those?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay. So I'm just going to go through a little outline. So I want to focus on what we do within the Child and Family Resilience Program, why we do it and how we do it. I want to touch on a couple of current projects and an invitation for you to get involved. Um, I want to go a bit deeper on those protective factors and strengths because I think that's super important as professionals and family members. And then I want to have a little look at the risk factors and then I'll sort of sum up. All right, so I talked to you about my PhD and when I use those 4 books that I talked about previously, they're just the rough little family books. I got permission from the families and I use them as data collection tools. So I'd read them to the children and I would chat about them with the children, and then the children would share what was happening in their family. And then I'd get them to draw pictures about what was happening in their family when their parent was deploying or other things that were happening in their family in regards to a parent training, working away, that type of thing. Um, and then I laminated those and I also gave them, I mean, it's sort of showing when I did it, but I put it on a USB stick and then they took them home and read it to the children. So they loved the storybooks and the early childhood service also said they wanted a copy of these storybooks. And during the data collection program, which was 4 weeks with the children every day, I also got more data, obviously, and they told me more stories of things that the children were struggling with, like being really clingy when the parent, as one parent left, or being really clingy when that parent returns, and things like that. So I would write other little storybooks as we were going along with that month. And again, they were all very rough. So afterwards, I also interviewed the parents and they said, right, well, we want you to go around and do all these early childhood activities around Australia, which is like a pretty big place, and just do these activities all the way around. Just keep, touring around and don't worry about your PhD. And because we found it's really helped the children. So the children before that, they said the parents and the educators said they were acting out, but they couldn't verbalize what it was that they were upset about. Um, and their parent was deployed or their parent had just come back or whatever. So I said, well, okay, well, I think I need to keep my job and finish my PhD. But I will try and do something. And they said, well, maybe write some programs and could you write some more storybooks? Could you create apps? Can you, they sort of gave us a list of what they wanted, modules, like everything. And I was like, right, right. And I was thinking, yes, I've got absolutely no idea how I'm going to do all that and a PhD, and I've got my own
Yeah.
3 children and a life, and anyway, so I just sort of had to park that idea. But they told me that they were really, how do I say this politely, really upset that there were no resources, in Australia for these families. There were primary school resources or elementary school, if there's some Canadians in the room, but there were no early childhood resources. And so they felt alone and they felt annoyed. Like,
Yeah.
some of them said things like, really, like, do you think that learning just starts when they go to school? Like, why are we being left alone? Why are we ignored when this is the hardest time because they don't understand what's happening? So, yeah, so I left them with the resources. I did finish my PhD. And then I said, oh, okay, I need to revisit that because I use this mosaic approach, which is participatory, where the children and the parents were researchers as well as being research participants. And when you do that, you sort of have a pact with them that you're going to try and help them with using the data to help them and other people in their group, which is a military group, right? So it's sort of like you're not just going to run away with the data and that's it. You're trying to better the lives of that group of people you're working with. So I got together with some people who I thought would be helpful, other educators, IT people, people with graphic art skills, things like that. We got some funding, and then we created some suites of books based on the data that we had, and we involved people who were from these families, so that was really important to us. And then other professionals that we thought would be helpful: psychologists, psychiatrists, support workers, educators, school teachers, mental health workers, things like that. All right, so we have different types of resources. We have research-based storybooks, and they feature lived and living experience narratives. So that means we take composite stories. We listen to the children for this PhD study, but we also listen to adult children from these families. We listen to the parents, and the educators and support workers and clinicians will tell us what we call composite stories. So they won't tell us about Judith and her children exactly. They might tell us, like, we see a lot of families that are experiencing this, we see families who are struggling with this or who have found this support that works. So we then build a narrative that encompasses those things. All right, so all of our resources are free. We have the worst business model of the century. Everything's free, and we do that because children already have paid paid a handsome price, we think, for being born into families that are service families. They are already paying, by relocating all the time, by their parent not being there all the time, by potentially doing dangerous things that could lead to consequences down the track. So we feel like the service that they and their parents do, that's enough, why we don't need to make a profit out of that. It would be helpful for our funding if we did have money, but we just decided we need to use volunteer labour, and we need to ask people for money, as in for donations from charitable organisations, philanthropic or whatever. There's two types of storybooks. There's general reading ones. So, for example, I talked about the relocation storybook. Anybody could read that storybook. It's suitable for anyone. And then we have really focused bibliotherapy books that are only for children who have experienced a parent with a particular issue, for example, a physical injury, a mental health injury, complex PTSD, other mental health conditions, or a moral injury. So we don't read those to the classroom. We don't read them to groups. They're just one-on-one bibliotherapy books for clinicians or parents or support workers to use. So very, very specific. We also have, for each storybook, we have online modules that go with it. So, for example, here in the picture, you can see we've got a book about post-traumatic stress that a parent has. And then related to that, we've got a parent and a support worker module that will give you more information and more activities to help with those particular children who are experiencing those. Each book has a specific age group that we sort of say we'll use, but it's fairly loose, and I'll show you why a little bit later. The modules have activities for children up to age 12, though. We try and extend that where we can. All right, so they're not just storybooks. They're a lot of work. So they take us over a year to write each one. And the reason is because at the very beginning, we have forwards from people with lived and living experience from these families, or perhaps they might have be service providers or educators or something themselves, clinicians. And then at the back, we have plain English research pages. So say the book was talking about uh, separation anxiety when a parent works away, then we will look what the research says about that, and we will make it simple enough that most people could understand that. And also teenagers might be able to read that if they've got good comprehension as well. So that's that part of it. We have a interdisciplinary approach. So I've talked about that a little bit before. So that's sort of a list of people that we have there. We have play therapists. So in the back couple of pages of the story itself, there's a whole heap of activities that help parents and educators and support workers like unpack the story and extend the learning and deepen the learning. There can be puppet play and role plays and creative arts things. So it just provides further touch points for the child to talk about the characters and what they're going through, but also maybe talk about what's going on in their family or what's going to go on in their family.
I love your mascot, which is a wombat. That's correct, isn't
Yeah.
it? Your little
Yeah. We love wombats. All right. So we use narrative-based approaches. So why do we do that? Why do we do all these stories? Well, humans are attracted to narratives. If I post on Facebook, I'm really just telling a little story about myself, and I'm curating that story. So I'm probably not going to show you the times that, I made a flop of my cooking, but when I get it together and it works, I might curate that story. We make meaning from experiences like that, and the literature shows us the research shows us that if families have a story about a difficult time that they've been through, they're more likely to come through it in a better way. So, for example, a story might go like this. We had a tough time when, Dad was injured, but we all pulled together. We had support from the neighbours, the support workers, the clinicians. Grandma came and stayed for a while to help us out. And we all learnt how to support each other, and we got through it. So that's like a little simple family story. But the other reason that we do it through stories is that we can safely practice our emotions. So when I watch a murder mystery, right, I might feel scared at times, and then I might learn to sort of, control that feeling, the shortness of breath and everything else. Or I might watch a movie where the main character's partner dies. Well, I haven't experienced that, but I can empathize with that character. And then if that terrible thing happened, then I might have at least practiced those emotions and learned how to potentially, experience them and potentially almost control them. But I also can learn from that character and how they learnt to deal with that emotion, if that makes sense. The other thing we do is when we see our lives reflected, and this is our catalyst for writing these storybooks, is when we see our life reflected in some way in a movie or in a book or in a story that someone tells, we feel a sense of belonging. We feel a sense of connection. And a lot of the children I found, they were lacking that connection because there were no storybooks that featured families that looked like them, the families that were going through the things that they were going through. So that's really important as well. The other thing is storybooks provide children with coping strategies, and they provide a springboard for discussions, which we've talked about. The other thing that they do is if I were to come to you today and Judith had invited me and I just started giving you a lecture on how to do your jobs better, okay, and how to be better at doing what you do, your guard would have gone up instantly if I started lecturing you. And that's good, right? Who wants to be told what to do by an Australian, right? But we do that because we're sort of thinking, why is she telling me? How would she know like what I'm going through, right? But if I had said to you, if I say to you, I met this support worker, Sarah, and when she first went in after her studies, she tried this tactic and this tactic and this tactic with children from armed force families. And then she found that they weren't opening up to her or they weren't responding to that. So then she talked to a supervisor and, she had really difficult conversations with them and she wondered for a while whether she'd stay in the sector. And so you start to sort of get a picture of Sarah and you start to empathize with her and your guard drops down. Okay. So all the best, you know, leaders, politicians, educators, religious leaders in the world ever in history have told stories to be able to get people to drop their guard and learn a lesson. Okay, because that's when we're most likely to remember it and most likely to take that lesson on board, like the moral of the story, that type of thing. All right. So if you're interested in our co-creation process, which is long and tedious and takes over a year, we have written papers about it. And if that excites you, that's great. You can have a look at that. But I'm not going to bore you with it. It's really tedious. It involves us drafting the storybook about 20 times and going back and forth to people with lived and living experience and saying, hey, have we got this right? And then they come back and say no, and then we go back and fix it up, and then eventually we come up with what we call a final draft that's been illustrated, and then we put that out to the public and we say, have we got this right? And then we take more feedback on, and then we adapt the book, and then eventually we release it for free. All right. I think I've already talked to this slide, what makes our stuff different. The thing I haven't done there is that we have read-alongs and audio and video recordings. We also, for some of the storybooks, not all of them, we have downloadable educational packs that you can just print. You can also just print the storybook yourself too and laminate it. You can do whatever you like with it. But with the packs, they have puzzles, they have puppets, like little popsicle stick puppets or pop stick puppets or whatever you call them, and little hand puppets you can make, and the children can act out the stories and things like that. So lots of educational activities for young people that you can work with them on those. We think we often think that we're writing for children, but in actual fact, we're often writing for the whole family. And when we try out the resources on adult children and adult children who are now parents themselves and their parents who are now grandparents, we get all these sort of like comments that make us really surprised. These storybooks
one
hit
of your
home.
storybooks made me cry before. So,
Yeah, they really hit home, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's because that going back, the power of a narrative, right? Because they see their lives reflected in it. And I want to read a couple of these to you. So it made me cry. This is a storybook about a serious topic. This was about moral injury. It made me cry. I believe that all efforts to address the complexity of mental injury for children are worthy of support. Speaking of a child who lived through it myself, having any level of understanding at all would have had a positive effect on my childhood. And that's an adult child of a veteran. Another one says, this is a first responder. So it's timely even now as I'm currently still processing the injuries I have. And he goes on, his children are young adults. And they still hurt from my actions or inactions because he's not fully recovered from that, right? So it's a process. I've reached out for additional support since reading the book, and I continue to address the unseen wounds this book gave a safe narrative to my story. Others say this wee book provides the clearest explanation yet of the origins and initial steps toward explaining and solving a highly complex problem that as veterans, my husband and I have been grappling with for 62 years. So really profound sort of impact on this. Others are saying, the family that I shared it with, they've actually been a catalyst to seek mental health support. Nothing hit them as hard and as honestly as this book did. It's a real game changer for their understanding. And it has a chance to break intergenerational trauma. So we didn't set out to do that, but it's sort of nice that it can happen. Yeah. All right. So I think it was also talked about that there is linguistic translations for Canadian French, but also for Canadians, and all their stuff's free as well. So you can definitely have a look at those on the site. They have funding to do these cultural adaptations so that they, the spelling's a bit different, maybe the uniforms look a bit different or whatever it is. So we have challenges for our project, like everything time. So yeah, it's just really time consuming. Most of us act as volunteers in the program, nearly all of us. I get paid, obviously, a salary from my university, but most of the work I do on the project is outside of time because it just doesn't fit within an academic workload. So we're all passionate about doing it. We look for funding, and that's ongoing. So if you know anybody who needs to give away some money, please send them our way so that we can create some more resources. But we're really lucky, in all seriousness, the number of people who contribute. Most books, there's about 30 people contributing, plus about 25 people who give feedback through the online portals. If it's a really complicated book, like the complex PTSD book we just did, that was more like 50 people, and then another 20 on top of that. So they're really big projects. We don't write very Australian books anymore. We used to have books with, kangaroos and koalas and emus and all that sort of thing on there. We don't do that anymore simply because there was a lot of funding that Canada had to come up with in order to culturally translate these books. And we feel like all the funding goes to the veterans and the service members, and the children are sort of left the crumbs on the table. And we sort of think, well, how about we combine with, wonderful organisations like, Forces Children Scotland, and also Canadian organisations, King's College London and things like that. We just pool our resources and we write books that will appeal in allied sort of countries, if that makes sense. We have books that are in process at the moment, and we would love you. I've got some links in the handout for you to get involved with that we'll give you later on. So our current project, we've got this one that's out for public comment, which is about the benefits, the protective factors of being in a family, service family, so armed forces family at the moment. And we would love your feedback on it because that means that it's more likely to be able to be used in different countries. Here's some QR codes. Please note that all of our stuff is pretty ordinary on a phone. So if you're sort of snapping a QR code, you're best to send it through to a computer or a iPad or a tablet. Everything's very small and very awkward on a phone for these resources. We also have something that you might really like to get you started, which is our personalised programs. So we worked with really smart technical people, which I'm not, and they came up with forms. So on the form on the left-hand side of that screen, I've just ticked that I was an educator, and I've ticked that I want to know more about separation anxiety when a parent works away. And then I've said that I want to know more about how to partner with community organisations or parents or something like that. And then it's come up with an instant list of the resources from our program, and they're all clickable, and you can download that and then you can send it to a parent, or you can download that and just use it for the day, or you can just use it as a web form, and then you can instantly do another one, whenever you want, when the child's needs change next week or tomorrow or whenever. So I want to talk now a little bit about, how am I going for time? Is that
You're
okay?
fine. You're absolutely
Yeah,
fine.
okay, great. So I just want to talk about protective factors. All right. So there are a lot, and I want to go through them. So there's a lot of pride in these families. There's pride in what the parents do. There's pride in what the whole family goes through in order to serve their community or their nation or, whatever it is. I mean, I don't know how it works in the UK, but a lot of our armed forces end up helping with COVID, with natural disasters, which we seem to be having more and more of, and all that sort of thing. So there's a lot of pride in that. There's protective community and identity. So that sense that they belong to something bigger than they are, that's really important. They get to sometimes experience different communities and cultures. That's good. Family role flexibility. So, for example, an older sibling might have to step up and help out with a younger sibling, that type of thing. They might have to empty the garbage bins and, take the dog for a walk and feed the dog when a mum's away on deployment or whatever. So financial stability, generally speaking, it's a fairly well paid, well, not rich, but like a reasonable paid job, and it's usually permanent, so it's not like, well, what's going to happen in 2 months' time. The service organisation themselves could provide some good supports for the family in different ways. I want you now to have a look at this one, which is the UNICEF components of nurturing care. So, nurturing care framework is something that early childhood really find is a great resource. So, it's looking at ways to make children flourish. So, you've got good health, adequate nutrition, responsive caregiving, security and safety, and opportunities for early learning. And there's more detail there. I'm going to share these slides with Judith too. So if you want them, you can reach out to me or reach out to Judith. So what I've done here is I've just put both of those together, and I want you just to have a little look. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to look at that, how they link up. I'll give you an example. Adequate nutrition and good health can often go with financial stability, because I can afford to go to a doctor. I can, afford to buy fresh food, maybe, that type of thing. But there's lots of links there. But then I also want you to think about, that's a best case scenario. But if I've just moved 3 times in 4 years or in 5 years, how that could be affected, so maybe I can't get into a doctor. Maybe there's a waiting list. Maybe, you know what I mean? Like, I'm so exhausted, I can't even, get to a doctor or think about how to get to a doctor, that type of thing. So obviously it's not to say that this is a perfect scenario. It's just something to think about. All right, so I want to take you through just a little bit of data about the positives. I'm not going to get time for it all, but I just want to show you a little bit. So in this one, we've got Sam, and a parent is telling me that they are, and it ended up in a storybook, and that's a storybook. Like, Sam has learnt how to bring her tissues when she's crying, when she's upset. He's learned to help the younger sibling get ready. He's learned to do the bins. He's learned to help with the gardening. He's learned to feed the dog. He's stepped up there. So that's, a really good thing. They often learn from each other. They find resources and ways of coping. And so we've got little strategies here, like a little sticker chart of, counting off the days. We've got that video that's been made to have the parent reading the stories, which the mum can put on when dad's away, that type of thing. They, care for each other. They can use care packages and send them to a deployed parent. They can learn to think about the parent and send them a drawing or whatever it is, and that can be for free. They might make a care package which could include some cooking. So these are little things the parents talk to us about, and the children talk to us about, and we put those in the stories as examples. they're pragmatic. Like in this one, the data was, we couldn't get anyone to sleep. One of them was having nightmares. There was all these fights about getting to sleep. So in the end, we just got through it and we just did it my way for a while and we all just slept in the same bed, right? Because that was just, we had all these little kids and it was just all too hard. And I needed to get sleep before things fell apart. They're practical. So, in this one, the parent who had been away for 9 months stepped back and said, okay, you do all the big parenting stuff, and I'll just ease my way in. You do all the discipline, blah, blah, blah. So that the children didn't have this almost complete stranger, do you know what I mean? Like suddenly disciplining them. So just that familiarity. They access professional support. So the preschool teacher was an amazing um, person who also had child psychology training. So they reached out because Sam was acting out. And so they said, well, you probably think that Sam doesn't understand what's happened, but he's probably overheard these conversations that you were having quietly somewhere, as children do. So maybe if you sit down and explain to him what was happening and where dad is and where it's going and all this sort of stuff for his second deployment, it might work. And as it says there, once we explained it, all the behavior stopped immediately. So these are some of the scenarios that we put into these stories. They prioritize relationships. In this one, the family said, the wife actually said, well, I just make him come away on a family holiday soon after he comes back. He doesn't want to, but it made a big difference to reconnect, so this is something they do. And also the use of digital communications to stay connected. They're usually very connected families as much as possible. They access support from extended families. They were given a choice, this particular family, to either, move somewhere or to go and stay with the in-laws for a while, and they chose to do that. Another one reached out to another family who was experiencing similar but different, a remote worker that works on the mine, so far away. And, I don't think I would have survived without her. So that connection. Another one talks about the Facebook group that's been a great support. So this one is sort of about how they access the supports within the military organisation. So they went to the special days before they went. They had people they could contact. The welfare people came, the padre came, or the chaplain. They got a book on dealing with deployment, all that type of thing. So they were accessing the supports that were available. That's not to say they all do, but this particular family was. Individual characteristics. So this is some educated data. This educator is saying time and again, I'm blown away with the resilience of them. And these are things that we put into the book. So what do you do when you miss your parents? This data is being used to show coping strategies in these storybooks. And where is work? Like, where does my parent go when they go to work? What is it that they're doing? So I've noticed with with a 5-year-old that they're supporting, he adapts very well in dad's absence. All right, so peer support. The youngest child's gregarious and outgoing and enjoys lots of friendships. So here in the storybook, we show those friendships that happen there. Military community support. Here's someone living on a base, and there's Dilwali festival that's being, so that doesn't happen in all families, but we try and show a variety of living experiences. I just want to touch on risk factors, and then I'm going to finish up. So risk factors, we know they're there. I don't want to go through all of them, but that's basically the fact that we have the frequent relocations. We've got a lot of deployment and training sessions away. We get transition fatigue. Elevated family stresses can happen at times. There can be disrupted education because they might move in and out of different schools, different curriculum year levels, different in Australia, different states and territories. That can really disrupt that. Disrupted friendships. A lot of the children talk about that they just really miss their friends, and then they don't want to connect too much with the next set of friends because they know they're going to have to move again. Disrupted community engagement and Also the risk of parental injuries, which may come to a reality later on. And then there's the transition to civilian life, which I know your organisation has just written a book about, which is all very
Filming it
exciting.
next week. So that'll be
Yes,
fantastic.
I'm very excited. I'm looking forward to it. I've seen the draft and it's just beautiful. So well done. So if you have a look at that, and then have a look at that caring, nurturing, caring framework, you can really think about, yeah, like how is that going to impact your responsive caregiving? If suddenly a parent has an injury, how are they going to do responsive caregiving as well as they did before? This is just reality. It's not a criticism of the parent or, that the parent's being neglectful, that, there's only one other parent, right? We assume. And so, the resources and time and everything, it's really hard, right? That sense of safety and security when they're just being moved around all the time. Obviously, that can change. Opportunities for early learning. In Australia, we have in rural, regional, remote, we have long waiting lists for early learning. And so if you're moved around a lot, you just might go from one waiting list to the next. So that can be really challenging for families as well. And often, if there's a civilian spouse, then they may or may not be able to get a job quickly, or they may or may not be able to get a job that's connected to what they normally do or using all their skills and things. Yeah. All right. So that's sort of about it. I just want to conclude. So I'm going to just go to the end, and Jude's going to be wonderful and put up in the chat a little handout for you. But I want to conclude by saying that while we've made a start to co-creating useful resources, much more needs to be done to address other issues that these children face. Additionally, different resource types and broader age groups are needed. So we know we haven't covered everything, and we know we haven't covered all family types and all that sort of thing. But we've made a start. If we don't address the gap in children's resources for this cohort, the risk of intergenerational trauma runs high when children's needs are not seen and the required services are not put into place to support the child's psychosocial development. I have on the slides got some boring things there about, if you want to read more in the references. If you have a look and open up that the handout, basically it is really helpful in terms of actually Meg, you might be able, sorry, Judith, you might be able to share
Yeah,
that.
I
Yep.
can at the moment add it to the chat, but I can certainly share it if that would be helpful.
Okay, that would
Let's
be
bring it
lovely.
up. Yeah.
Yeah. So on that, there is a link to obviously the resources, but there's also a link to a couple of ways that you could help us. One would be to give us anonymous feedback about that book, about the benefits of military family life or service family life. And then another one there, a Canadian organisation is providing funding for and working with us to write a book about the experiences of children. Yeah, that's terrific. The experiences of children in service families or military families when the parents separate. And we do know that that's a more common experience than in the general population. So what's unique about that? What makes it particularly challenging in those families? Because obviously you've got very mobile families that move around. So the very last two, well, yeah, the last two, the pink and the purple QR codes, you choose between one or two of those, depending if you're a service provider or a family, but please pass them on to other people and families and things. And they might be able to provide some anonymous stories about, or just anecdotes about what happens, what happens for families experience relationship breakdown, and how is this quite unique in military families, so that we've got some things to work with and some stories to tell. well in the storybook, little anecdotes there. The green one is all about giving feedback about the book that we've got, and we want to have that out by hopefully March or April if we can get some feedback. So that would be good. And please pass it on to your circle. Please understand that all our stuff is published under a Creative Commons license, which means that you can lift it out, you can cut and paste it into parent newsletters or whatever you want to do, as long as you say where it first came from, and you can adapt it. You can make it sound more Scottish or more Canadian, or change the lingo. You can do whatever you like, different support links and everything else there. So that goes the same for our books. So when I've retired and I'm not doing this anymore, people can just take it and change it and update it, because planes mightn't look the same, or haircuts, or whatever it is, things will change, and so these can go on being used. People from any country can use them at the moment. They don't have to ask my permission, but they can ask permission of our team, and they can adapt the resources as they go. But I wish you all the very best with the work, and thank you for supporting military connected families. It's a huge job, and I know it can be tiring and I know it can be challenging, but I really thank you for doing that.
A massive thank you. I'm actually trying to do the clap function on the chat. That was absolutely amazing, Marg.
Oh, thank you.
Well done. It's just so incredible, the work that has gone into these wonderful resources. And I think we do have a wee bit of time for some questions, if you're happy to take some
Right, yeah,
questions.
absolutely.
I know Craig, apologies Craig, I'm just getting back to you, but I know Craig asked in the chat, I'd love to ask you, Marg, do you see cases where behaviours commonly associated with ADHD, ADD, etc. in children from armed force families are actually trauma adaptations linked to deployment, separation or instability? And how should we responsibly navigate that distinction?
It's really interesting. So I have a colleague, Australian colleague, and I've worked with her on quite a number of things. And she did a whole study about children from service families, and she found that the children were misdiagnosed when there was trauma in the family. For the boys, generally with ADHD, and the girls with borderline personality disorder, and that was a really common thing. And which is such a shame, because it's just the way it is. So I would recommend trying to do anything that's trauma informed, even if even if the parent, tells you there's nothing wrong with the child and they're not traumatized. They possibly are. Like, just moving so many times can really, destabilize, those things that they felt secure, right? So think about trauma. I would say think about routines, and think about making that child feel safe and secure, and the more predictability that is there, the safer that child will feel. They like boundaries. Children will always kick against the boundaries, but if they know that that's definitely, if you say this and that's going to happen and it's not negotiable, it's just there, then at least they feel safe, yeah. It's really hard, and I can hear where you're coming from, but trauma. I would definitely look at that. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. Hope that answered your question, Craig. If anyone else has a question to ask Marg, please just raise your hand. There's 40 of us, so if you want to raise your hand, or equally, if you do want to pop a question in the chat function, that's absolutely fine. And you've popped that in. I was having difficulties popping that in the chat, so thank you for putting that in. I was going to ask Marg, actually, with regards to gathering the lived experience, do you ask where, because I know you're trying to have an international reach, do you ask where the information is coming from? Do you ask where the family's based who are filling in the forms, or is it just anonymous?
It's yeah, generally speaking, it's anonymous, but usually through spelling sometimes and terminology, we can sometimes pick that we don't always know. Some of our forms and things we will ask those questions, but sometimes it's quite nice to be anonymous. So yeah, and we always have people on the authoring team who are from each of the UK, Canada, and Australia, so that they can say to us, "Oh, hang on, we would never say that," or like, or that's outdated. We don't say that anymore, or something like that. Because terminology changes as a whole, but it also changes in different countries at different times. So, yeah, so it sometimes means that we will redraft pages over and over again. Yeah. So we like lots of, the more UK people that can respond to our surveys, the more it means that we're getting it right for UK. Do you know what I mean? Whereas if we have one UK person, then I'm just relying on them to be the font of all knowledge of UK experience. So yeah, we don't want that.
Yeah, so everyone fill in the form then if you're
Yes,
able
please.
to.
Yes, please.
That
And
would
and
be
also for
fantastic.
the divorce and separation one, if you have anecdotes about that, that would be just so helpful for that organization. Yeah.
So, Sharon's just asked about the recording. I will send out a follow-up email after this webinar with a link to the recording, Marg's slides, and the handout which she's popped in the chat, with links to all the resources that Marg's been talking about today. I do have a question from Louise as well. So from a policy interest, what would be the most important policy shifts or investments that would make the biggest difference for babies and toddlers in armed forces?
Yes, so I love this question. I you probably won't like the answer. I will say it's the relocations. So I would ask that you would say that if they have children, okay, that 3 times is the most that they can move in that child's lifetime. Yeah, that would be to me everything for that child, because you're talking about education, you're talking about stress levels, you're talking about a reduced impact of the stresses, because often it's what pulls the relationship apart. It's what's responsible. I can't do this anymore. I've changed careers for you. I've changed jobs for you 7 times. If you want to stay in the military, go ahead. But I'm out the door and I'm taking the kids or whatever. Um, and it also, we have a lot of children now with special needs. And so parents it breaks their heart because, oh, I finally found somewhere that is dealing with my child's special needs. Um, and now you want me to move again? Like how is that helpful for the child? It's the biggest thing. It really is the biggest thing that you could do for them.
That's a really great answer, I know. We also have a question from Johnny. Do you have experience of using families' lived experience in peer support roles to provide additional support to families?
Yeah, we have an organisation called Military Emergency Services Health Australia. I'll pop it in the chat. And they call themselves MESHA for short, like an acronym. So I believe that they do that. So I do work with them, and they generally have people who've, lived the dream in these families and then gone on and become mentors, and run courses to help families. And that I believe they're still doing it. They've done it for years, and it seems to work really well, that model. And I'm sure if you looked up on their website, but even shoot them an email and just to find out more about that model and how it works, it seems to work really well. Sometimes, interestingly, Facebook groups can be a great source of support. I would point you to my colleague who's in my team, and helps with all these books. she's a Navy partner, and she's also a naval reservist herself. But her PhD looked at Facebook support groups, yeah, and they were amazingly helpful. I mean, they could be sources of tension as well, but they were also, but they were, yeah, amazingly helpful. So sometimes you had people that were moving to, say, a base, and then you had somebody who'd lived there for a long time, and they say, oh well, you must try this, and you must, you know, come to this coffee morning, and you know, this GP is the best, and blah blah blah, you know what I mean? So that was that. I know it's not exactly the same, but it's definitely that peer-to-peer sort of support in some way, that network, and it made a huge difference. Yeah.
Fantastic. I don't know if we've got any more questions. Yeah, that's a really good point about face group groups. That's actually the only reason I keep my Facebook when you move, and it's good. So that would be a very interesting read. I'll attach that.
Sorry, just a little bit more to the last two questions. So the policy one and the peer one. Sorry, we do have another thing in Australia, and it's called Defence School Mentors. Now, it has the word school in it, but they are supposed to help out in early childhood services as well. I think it originally started with schools, and it's funded by an agency, Defence Member Family Support, who are staffed by Department of Defence in Australia, and they are people with lived experience. So they're usually in current or previous serving families, and they go in and help out. They get a certain amount of hours depending how many children are enrolled in that early childhood service or school, and they work with the children. Yeah, thank you. And they're really, 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 it's a good one. And I'd say if there was another policy setting, would be to fund these people. They don't get enough hours. They all complain they don't get enough hours in the schools and the early childhood services. And I would definitely give them more money, or if you don't have them, then have them, because they are, a lot of them say if they move to a school where there isn't one, or an area where there isn't one, they're like, oh, like this is really hard, you know, because they're so helpful.
It's amazing, fabulous. I am very conscious of it. It's just been so wonderful, Marg. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
And as I've said, I will share all this wonderful information, the handout, the slides. I will send that out to all attendees on the webinar, and the recording, I think Meg just popped in the chat, will be on our YouTube channel. A very, very small request from myself and for Marg as well. If it would be wonderful if you could just use these 2 to 3 minutes to fill out a very quick evaluation form on today's webinar. We are really keen to continue the In Conversation webinars, and we really would love to know from you what kind of topics you would like the conversations to explore and develop. I'll also just pop the link in the chat. Sorry, I'll do that just now. I'll stop sharing that, and I'll pop the link in. But if you could fill in the evaluation right now. It'll only take you 2 minutes, and then it's done and dusted. There's not any complicated questions. It's ticky box. I think there's 2, and the rest are ticky boxes. So if you could do that just now, that would be absolutely wonderful, and we'd really, really appreciate it. And Marg, I would just like to end by saying a massive thank you for your time and your insights. It's just been wonderful, and I really appreciate that you are joining us late in Australia. And you have been working all day, so I really, really appreciate you joining us. It's just been wonderful, and I think everyone will agree that the resources you've shared, your professional insights and personal insights have been fantastic. So thank you so much. And it's
Thank you very much
to have you. And thank you to everyone else. As I said, I will also send that out, but our next In Conversation webinar will actually be with the Dandelion Military Families, which is going to be advertised soon. So that's a grassroots organisation who help support parents with parental mental health. So that will be happening in March. So I'll advertise that out to everyone as well, once we've got all the details of that ready. So thank you so much.